Are you looking for a life of freedom and flexibility? Do you want to have as much success with your family as you do in business? Here at the Entrepreneurial Family Man Podcast, we break down the barriers and bust the myths that are keeping you from living your best life. You deserve a thriving family, rich faith, and business success. Visit us at efmlife.com to connect. And now, welcome to the Entrepreneurial Family Man Podcast.
Are you connected to yourself and your core values? Are you living the life that's centered around the right moral hierarchy of values? Today is a two-part series. At the start here, we want to talk about the hierarchy of values in our lives and what that means and how that is the compass, how that's the rudder for the life that we're living. In our next part, we'll talk about building your business around your core values. But today, we want to talk about this most important topic, a foundational one to who we are as men, who we are as a believer, as a Christian, who we are as a father, as a husband, as someone involved in building a business. There are these order of life that we need to recognize. And how do we prioritize these things? So today we want to talk about this hierarchy of values. God first, then your marriage, then your kids, then your career, and then, dare we say it, church?
You heathen, Chris.
Oh, I just had a lightning bolt hit the... But hey, today is the day that we really need to unpack this. And I'm excited about this episode and this conversation. So guys, let's get started. I mean, so the hierarchy of values is huge. And we talk about aspects of this a lot. And we have in the past, 13, 14 episodes, we've done that. But let's talk today about this order. And frankly, let's talk about first how we've gotten this a little bit wrong in the past and what we've done to fix that. So with God, marriage, kids, career, church, what has that looked like or not looked like well in your own life?
I'll jump in here. I'm just seeing there's a big difference between God and church, right? It's almost like the bookends of the hierarchy of values. And so I think if I'm going to answer that question first here, I'll plead guilty here that I've confused the two. I've thought that
talk about
being a good church person or acting a certain way is the same as pleasing God. And obviously on this chart, there's a difference, right?
Well, that's what my pastor always said. Is he not right?
Well,
I hear you, Jamie. That one has been a big one for me too. I've used those words interchangeably, God and church. Like I've seen them as the same thing, but my goodness, they are very, very different. When I think about my relationship with God, could that carry through church? Absolutely. Could that be inspired and encouraged by church? Yes. But my relationship with God needs to flow through every step of these priorities. My marriage, my relationship with my kids, my career, that's lived out through all these different categories. Now, when I think of my relationship with God, it's how I view him in the quiet of my own heart, my own head. How I connect with him when it's just me and him, and how I'm trusting him and walking with him through life. Now, church is kind of an activity, right? It can be a social activity. There's a lot of things that do point us to faith in church, but I know for myself, when I first got involved in church on my own, man, moving up that ladder, it sounds funny, but I really had this desire to move up the ladder and become more respected within church and make more of an impact within that community. And I have to be honest, I held that up higher than my relationship with God sometimes, even higher than what I was doing for work and working out my vocation. So I know at one church I had the privilege of helping to lead their groups and their group life. And man, when I was in that position, meeting with the head pastor weekly to kind of flesh that out and lead that well, I thought I was on top of the world, but I had it backward. It was not God, and there were other things in my life that needed more attention, more priority than that.
Yeah. I'm just looking here, Michael. If we take that hierarchy and switch it upside down, this is what it would be. It'd be church number 1, career number 2, kids number 3, marriage number 4, and God being the last one. And I think just to be honest, like if we're not careful, that can sort of happen accidentally, that we're just kind of drifting to a place where we're just busy doing things and passing time. And that's definitely something we want to avoid here. And I think that's why we are having this discussion.
Yeah.
Chris,
I mean, frankly, when you said that, I'm thinking of so many guys that I've talked to, and we've probably all been around, or maybe we've been those guys that have that completely flipped, right? Where church is really a big focus. And I think I love how we have the bookends here. And Michael, when you were talking about how God and your relationship with him is so different than the church. The church is an aspect of our relationship. It's about the relationship and the quietness of your own heart and your life. I think of, and I'm guilty of this, being a human being versus a human doing. And I think the church is so, and this is a generalization, right? But if we think about our ministry aspects of church involvement, that's very much a doing thing. And this is some of the exact same stuff that Jesus talked about when he said, you hypocrites, you Pharisees, you whitewashed tombs, right? Versus what's in the inside of your heart. If there were no church involvement in your life, if there were no church, if you're in a country where there was no church literally, what would that relationship look like as just being with God? And that's a huge paradigm shift, I think, for a lot of American believers.
Yeah. Well, there's so much affirmation in being part of a church community. And so that affirms how we're doing with God sometimes and gives us this false sense of, yeah, I'm doing great with God. Like I'm involved in the church. I'm part of this committee. I'm part of that ministry. Man, I'm on fire. But man, I love that picture. What if it's swept away in a day? Where do you stand with God in your own perception? Yeah.
Yeah. And looking at this hierarchy again, I think it'd be really easy for us to give ourselves an assessment just out of 1 to 10. How are we doing in each of these areas? And I think if we're going to be honest, we're going to see a little bit of lopsidedness there. I know it's really easy to focus on where you're strong. And I think that's what we do in this hierarchy. And so if you're killing it in your career, you feel a lot of self-esteem and you can put a little more focus on that than you need to. And same thing with church, kids, marriage. I know we talked a lot about making a household a marriage-centered home instead of a kids. And I think with all the activities in our society, it's really easy to get away from focusing on your relationship with your spouse when you're just so busy. And so we often mess that one up too. I'm probably just the only one here, though. Like I'll admit guilt. I know you guys. I really admire how you guys are doing it, so I know you guys don't make the same mistakes as me.
Jamie, you're on a roll. Can you tell us about that? Like, do you have a story around that?
Well, so let me just look here. So you could actually give me any one of those 5 things, and I could give you a story. So let me just start with church and marriage. So marriage is number 2 on the hierarchy, and church is the last one, which I think the lightning bolt's going to come because we said church is the last one. But do you hear that?
It already did here in Oregon, by the way.
So I remember being early in my marriage, being worried about showing up on time. And I'm driving to church with my family, and probably we were late because of my own fault. Like I wasn't helping out. I was doing something myself. And I'm embarrassed to say this now, but like I'm more worried about other people who are not living under my roof that don't really have a big effect in my household than my own wife. I mean, that's a starter. I'm like, where do you want me to, I can go on forever,
baby. No, very similar. And I have that exact same kind of situation that happens from time to time. But I remember too, just as it relates to church and kids and church and marriage, how even just recently in the last couple of years and definitely, a decade or so ago, realizing, we wanted to be and have been involved in hosting small groups at our church or doing things, being involved in ministry, right? so you have people that say, hey, well, you're doing something. Why don't you do more? And as I started to become a father, I realized, you know what? My ministry, my first ministry is with my wife. My second is with my kids. And I remember turning down ministry opportunities for the first time in my life because I said, I want to focus more on my kids than someone else's kids, and being involved in the youth group and middle school, which I love that kind of stuff. But boy, that was a big deal for me because of my upbringing, and just always, like you said, you both talked about wanting to be involved, wanting church leadership affirmation. Man, that was a big one.
I've shared this before on other episodes, but I had the same thing as a Spanish teacher, that I was pouring into other people's children, and then I came home and had nothing left for my own children. That is something that we need to be really careful about examining our own self, is that we're so involved in all these activities, and then our families sort of get the leftovers of us. They're not getting the first fruits, like the best. And sometimes it feels like we're not doing right when we're not committing. But it reminds me of that scripture that is kind of like one of those, it's not even a 2x4 on the head. It's like a crowbar on the head. First Timothy, I'm reading this. I don't have it memorized. I'm not a Bible scholar here. Consult your own theologian. First Timothy 5:8 says, but if anyone doesn't provide for his own family, and especially his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever.
Whoa.
Ooh.
Worse than an unbeliever?
Yeah, so you can be in the front row being an usher at your church or doing all these things for your community, and then you come home and your family is like wishing that you would have done that stuff with them. And yet, like, people in our culture and our community can think we're pillars and we're worse than an unbeliever and we've denied the faith.
Oh my gosh. How do we not be worse than an unbeliever then? What does that look like? Like we have pretty much have to flip this thing upside down. Like you said before, Jamie, right? Like naturally we're going to flow in the opposite order that these should be in if we're not careful.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it look like then to live this out in a healthy, in a way that's sound and works long term and protects your family and helps you live in congruence with what's truly important?
Mm-hmm. So I have a metaphor, Michael. Do you remember when Dan at the Mastermind had the 3 different size cups, and he did that for us?
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is that we can fill up our cup and we have nothing to give anybody else if we have a huge goblet. And then we can also have a small goblet. But the actual measure that makes way more sense is that we fill up our own cup and then we have an overflow to give to other people. And so that would look like you take this hierarchy, and it starts with God and then our marriage. We pour into those things and we honor those relationships, and we do what we behave in a manner that is honoring in those. And the byproduct should be that we have this leftover margin and abundance in our life that we can serve more effectively in our communities and in our church. But only is that correct and right when our own cup is full at home. And so as husbands and fathers, we are honoring the people that matter most.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how John Eldridge frames this too. We, as the man of the relationship, we go to God to get our strength, and then we bring our strength to our wives. So we're laying our lives down for our wives. We're not going to our wives to get strength and expecting them to help carry us. We go to God as men. We get built up and affirmed by Him. Bring that to our marriage. Lay down our lives for our wives so that together we can lay our lives down for our children next. And then we focus on our vocation, right? Our career. Like we put our strengths and our gifts that God has given us to work so we can provide for our kids and honor God and provide for our wives. And here's the kicker. So we can give to the church. So if our career is
we can serve
behind all those things, we're going to be dead broke and won't be able to give to ministry and give away tithes. So this order is pretty important.
Yeah, that's an awesome summation there. Michael, and I want to just go through and unpack that, right? So in terms of this episode and the order or the points, we're really just going to focus on this hierarchy: God, marriage, kids, career, church. So let's break those down a little bit, because what you said was so key in that it starts with God. It starts with our relationship. So I want you to think about, like, what are you doing now to invest in that relationship? I've usually had kind of ebbed and flowed in my personal devotions in the mornings. And fortunately, I'm in a space now where, like, that's going pretty well. But there are times where you get off track. And so what are we doing now to go to our Lord and Savior for strength each day? Because we know what's coming next in the ladder. So what are some practical things you guys do? I mean, what are some tips that you would say, hey, this didn't work, this has worked?
I love what Michael said about we don't go to our wives or our kids for the affirmation. God has to be the one that fills up that cup so we have an abundance to give to other people. We can get really caught up in this trap of feeling value as a man and either our paycheck, of how people in our community look at us, if we're good fathers. And I think that's all wrong. Like, we need to go to the source.
Jamie, you helped me with this a lot, because so much of my walk with God, I used to measure by how I'm keeping up with the tasks, with the devotionals, with how much I prayed, with how many times I read the Bible. And if I hadn't done it in a couple days, just because things got crazy with the kids or whatever, I'd start to feel like bad about myself or feel like I'm dropping the ball in some way. One thing that you helped me see, Jamie, just through our friendship, is that, like, I love how Bob Goff puts it. He's already got your picture in his wallet, right? He's already a big fan of yours. You're his kid. Like, just come to him, regardless of where you're at in life, and just accept the fact that he loves you and walk with him as a loved son, and not as someone who can then approach the throne because you did your reading this morning.
That's huge. That is huge. That God has got our picture in his wallet. That is awesome. And it's so true, though. I mean, he is just there. And I think of, as a Brother Lawrence practice his presence, throughout the day. I mean, so there's sometimes, I know I've been part of groups, right, where it's like, oh, you have to kind of self-flagellate because you're not doing your devotions or whatever. But it's like, you know what? If you're not doing those kind of things, you should just be, anytime you can, throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month. It doesn't matter how long you've been having those kind of conversations. Just be thankful for the fact that he is right there, ever present, listening, wanting you to communicate. And so I love that. So talk about, like, I mean, as you go down to the marriage aspect, what does laying down your life for your wife look like? That's a big question, right?
Oh, yeah, it is a big one. And I don't know if there's any easy answer to such a big question, but I think holding her up as the most important earthly relationship that you have, I think, is step one. How you do that, man, that's complex depending on how your wife is wired and who she is. But man, that has to happen first. Is she the most important person in your life, or isn't she? If we asked her if she is, or she feels like that, what would she say? That's a tough question for all of us to think about. But man, if we're not asking that, we're drifting.
I haven't mastered this, but I know what it's like to turn that around. And I think the first step for me, at least, had been to start caring about what she thinks of me more than other people. And I think that's at least a start, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could tell you too, where I've failed in this in the past. Years ago, my first career, I was so focused, and this hierarchy was all mixed up. But I was so focused on my career instead of my wife, instead of God, instead of church, all this stuff. And boy, I really, kind of just messed up there for a few years of getting that all out of whack. And it wasn't until, like, having, almost, you kind of sometimes have to have these little crises in life. aspects where you go, okay, I need this, the whole paradigm needs to be shaken up. And, what you guys both said there is so valuable in terms of really understanding your wife. And I mean, that's the whole point, right? I mean, it talks about living and understanding with your wife. That's what it says in the Bible. Now, not a whole lot of guys that can say, I completely understand my wife. That's a whole other multi-episode discussion. But understanding, I mean, even just recently, right? Alicia and I going over like, what are our values as a unit? It's just the two of us. What are our values? What are our values as a couple, as a family? And how can we align those with other aspects of our life as we talk about where we're living and what we're doing? I mean, those are things that we're really discussing right now again and bringing up. And those are things as guys, we need to have those kind of tough conversations periodically just to make sure we're on the same page moving forward.
Yeah, no doubt. And here come the kids too, right? They're part of the picture.
Oh, the kids, man, this is getting easier. Oh wait, no, it's not.
Yeah.
Okay, talk about this. We live in a society that wants to program your kid and program their schedule constantly, right? There's ballet, there's soccer, there's football, there's extracurricular activities, there's school, there's all this stuff. How do you avoid having a kid-centric family, a kid-centric marriage, and not a husband and wife-centric household?
So next you're going to tell me that the family bed model is totally screwed up.
Well, it depends what you want your bed to look like. I mean, are you pretty much done being romantic with your wife? If so, then hey, bring the family in.
You guys haven't heard of that though? There's like some people that have a philosophy that like the kids are the center of the world and you need to give them self-esteem. So if they want to sleep in the bed, they should be allowed to. I think on this episode we're saying like that's not good. Like you should probably just sleep with your wife and not the kids.
Yeah, I've heard of that. I don't adopt that though.
Can I just agree that that's just a bad idea?
Bad idea.
And that actually, how's your wife going to feel if your kids are the most important people in your household? Not very special, not very prioritized. And guess what? Your marriage is what gives the kid stability, the strength of your marriage. So if you make it about the kid, then your marriage is already suffering and it's taking away what you can offer to your kids. But we'll get into that more on another episode.
But it's so key. I mean, I think there are so many people that do get this out of whack. And I mean, gosh, with the number of kids each of us have, you've got to be careful with this up front. Or I mean, we're sometimes guilty there of saying, okay, whoa, we need to pull back here. We got football going on and ballet going on. And so just being intentional with, there's going to be seasons of life and there's going to be even literal seasons where you say, okay, we know that this is going to be maybe a kind of a crazy 8-week period, but there's going to be a lot of life there and the kids are going to enjoy this and we're going to have that fun time on the sidelines. But as long as you're on the same page first and you have the conversation as husband and wife on what could this look like for our children. But boy, those are some tough conversations to have. And it flies in the face of the American dream, right?
Mm-hmm. It really does. To deny your children for the good of your marriage, you selfish son of a... Never mind.
That's right.
Right. Like Elf, son of a nutcracker.
Yeah. Love it.
So how does, if you have these things, like we talked about, we come to God for our strength. We have that. We're fulfilled in that. And we have then the ability to pour into our marriage. And our marriage is focused on being the best marriage it can be. And we're ready to lay down this foundation for our kids. And now we've got this great family dynamics that we're being intentional with. Where does career come into the picture? Because again, Jamie, you mentioned earlier, this is usually flipped around and upside down. So now that you have those three main points of the hierarchy established, talk about where does our career come into play within all this discussion?
But that's how I love my family and honor God and serve my wife is by grinding out for 90 hours a week and providing for them. Why can't they see that? Don't you get
because
it? I'm
you're
loving
going to
it.
have a full bank account and be bankrupt at home.
Oh. Ouch.
It's tough,
You can't
right?
buy those relationships back, can you?
No. That's tough, right? So how do we approach our career, our job, our business that supports those things above, that supports the things we've just talked about? What does that look like? I mean, you guys both, I mean, all three of us, but you both have jobs, businesses, careers, right? That you've built because you have these other things established and in the right position. And so you've said, I'm not going to approach this enterprise and grind it out for 90 hours. I want to position this whole thing to where I have time and freedom and flexibility to do the things that are most important with my wife and my kids. I mean, I see that in both of you, that you have the ability to schedule your time and be creative. I mean, all of us could go and say, hey, it's Tuesday morning, it's 11 o'clock. Let's take our kids out fishing. We can do that, right? But that's not how most guys think.
Well, yeah, and let's be honest here. This schedule that we have now, it wasn't always that way. So I think just like that reverse kingdom sort of thing that we talked about earlier, it starts sometimes where we need a career to just provide for a family. It's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy, right? Where survival is the first thing. We're called to create an income and provide. But that's not the main goal of life and living as men. And it's definitely a trap that men can get caught up in. So first of all, you need to provide and be a good provider for your family in whatever capacity that you need and feel called to do. And you just do your best with that, but you don't forget why you're doing that. You serving God and your wife and your family come first. That is the how that you serve God, is by going into the marketplace, working for somebody else or providing a service as an entrepreneur. And we just cannot get caught up in thinking that is the whole goal, is to have success in the career. That is the vehicle to live this life.
Yeah, very well said, Jamie. We're all in process with this stuff too. I mean, if I examined every detail of my life, does it reflect this hierarchy perfectly? No, it doesn't. I'm working on it. Like I spend more time in my business now than I do with my family, probably, or it's probably close at this point. I don't know. So don't beat yourself up if you're not there yet, but just remember that that's something to be pursuing, to hold this hierarchy in front of you and realize, okay, I might be spending too much time at work right now and thinking that and giving myself an excuse that, well, this is how I'm loving my family. Well, don't camp out there. Like, look at ways that you can spend more time with your family and in your marriage and invest more in those things. It's a process. Give yourself some grace in that process.
Yeah. It's a process. That's for sure. And it's one of those things where I think any guy can ask themselves, and probably should routinely, examine what you're doing now. What's working, what's not, what can I eliminate? I mean, take a look at what you're doing now, and this 5, 10, 20 years down the road. Is that what you want your daily routine to be, right? And if not, you need to make a pivot. You really need to make a pivot there. So, I mean, I remember even for myself in my first career, I examined, okay, this is where I am now, and this is kind of the track that I'm going to be on. And this is the type of career that's basically being available 24/7. There's no way that I could be a good father in this environment. There's no way that I could continue to try to work on being a good husband. So I had to make a big pivot at that point. I think there's a lot of guys that need to examine, what's the next couple of decades look like if I stay where I am now? And that's a big deal. So, okay, so we get back to the last part of this hierarchy, and we've kind of maybe bashed a little bit, but let's talk about church. Let's talk about ministry and how this plays into, again, we've gone down this hierarchy, and these things are fulfilling and they're satisfying. Let's talk about how ministry and church involvement can support those other things. What does that look like?
Yeah, churches are wonderful places, right? It's a place that you can sing and worship God. You can be encouraged, meet other believers, pray, be edified, build other people up as well. It's really, we're not trying to bash churches here at all. They can be an amazing part of the picture of your life. Amazing addition to what you're already doing to add value to your family. So I hope you're not getting the wrong idea here. There's a ton of value in being a part of a church for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would, if you've taken Psychology 101, you know that pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of human, what is it called? The hierarchy of human needs. But survival is at the bottom. So, Michael, just to kind of add one to what you're saying, imagine your relationship with God is not in a good place and your marriage is going down the tubes, and now you're just like a pillar at your church and you volunteer for everything. It's almost like being $100,000 in debt and having very little income and spending a lot of money in personal development and going on cruises and doing all that other stuff. It could just be out of whack and not the right context. Church being important, it's got to make sense, just like the analogy of the cup, where there's an overflow. And so starting from the relationship with God and having that great marriage and just being good with your family and serving them, and then giving out of that abundance where you serve at church, not at this place of weakness, but like you have something to offer and you have something to give.
That's good. That's so good. I think that's how I approach this part of this hierarchy is, and also again, if you have those things that are already in alignment, then your wife and you are talking about what are ways that we can serve out of abundance. What are ways that we can get our kids involved in ministry? There's opportunities here where if this is all in alignment, then you can do things as a family that's fulfilling. And I think that's even probably more important to do it as a family, to show and to lead your wife and to lead your kids that say, hey, here's an opportunity where we can come in, and maybe it's there literally at the church. Maybe it's a ministry or an outreach that the church has, or there's ministries in your community where you can focus on giving back and you're rolling up your sleeves together as a family doing it. I think that's so much more meaningful than saying, hey, guys, going to be gone every other Tuesday for the next years because I have this church committee meeting, and you just are away from your family. I mean, that's not the way to do it, right? So this is a big thing. And I love what you said there earlier, Michael, about church is and should be intended to be, and really was, a life-giving community, right? It says, do not forsake the assembling of the saints, because there's purpose to it. There's purpose that it brings additional color to this relationship that we already have with God that we're pouring into. So this is just one area that we can be adding to that conversation with our relationship.
Yes. Yeah. Great points, Chris. So let's bring this one together. We're talking about a hierarchy, of a moral hierarchy. What order do you live your life in? We've landed on this, that God is first, that marriage comes second, kids third, career fourth, and church last. You might be mad right now listening to this thing. This might rub you the wrong way. Hey, listen, this might be a completely new concept to you. We're not saying that we are theologians. We're not saying that we have this perfect. But based on what we understand from Scripture and from following God in our own lives, this is what we've landed on. So test it. Read about it. Test it with Scripture. Talk to some of your mentors, people that you look up to spiritually, and ask them about this. Does this fit you? Maybe this is deeply resonating with you. Maybe you're thinking of areas in your life right now where you're out of alignment and that you need to make a change. So I'd ask you to dig in a little bit. What are some of those areas of your life that aren't lining up? Maybe you're spending too much time in one of those areas, or maybe you're holding your career up above your family or your marriage. So as an action step, I want you to examine this in your own life. Maybe even write them out and ask yourself, what's out of order?
Thank you for listening to the Entrepreneurial Family Man podcast. For show notes, resources, and to connect with us, visit www.entrepreneurialfamilyman.com.